Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more esoterica. Today we're diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with the Lotus as a universal symbol. There are no ancient symbols without a deep and philosophical meaning attached to them, their importance and significance increasing with their antiquity. I am going to take a little bit of exception with that, right? I say all of the time, it does not matter how long it has been a thing, it does not make it correct. That is a minor problem, right? This in particular, talking about the lotus and its symbology, does not necessarily present a problem. But sometimes with doctrines, right, we have been doing this thing a very long time. That doesn't mean that it is a correct thing. And so we also need to bear in mind as we get into this that our current modern interpretations of symbols may or may not be exactly what they intended when they created the symbol. We assume that it is because we place the value that we have placed upon it on them as well, and that is not necessarily true either. It is entirely possible, it is even likely, but that does not mean that it is true. That's just something to keep in mind as we go through these symbologies. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's correct, and just because we believe that this symbol means this thing does not mean that the symbol actually means that thing. Such is the lotus. It is the flower sacred to nature and her gods, and represents the abstract and the concrete universes. Now see this? This is a supposition. This is not indeed factual. It is our interpretation of something. We believe that this flower is sacred, so we have placed the value upon it, that we have created symbology behind it. That does not mean that it is sacred to nature in any particular way. It also does not mean that it was sacred to her gods, because honestly, I don't believe in her gods. There is a God. It is beyond the scope of human understanding. It is literally every single atom in existence all at the same time, and all of the space between it. I say all of the time, it is me, it is you, it is the space between me and you, and the space between the space between me and you. Everything in existence and all of the nothing between the everything is God. So if you have seen it in full, it is not God. If you have seen it incarnated, it is not God. It can be a representative of, but that does not make it God. And so even if there are angels and demons and aliens, all the same thing, even if it is one of those entities, that is not God. Even if it is there as a direct representative of the Creator that we do not understand, it is still not God. That is important. That is extremely important. And her gods, and represents the abstract and concrete universes, standing as the emblem of the productive powers of both spiritual and physical nature. It was held sacred from the remotest antiquity by the Aryan Hindus, the Egyptians, and the Buddhists after them, revered in China and Japan, and adopted as a Christian emblem by the Greek and Latin churches, who made of it a messenger, as the Christians do now, who replace it with the water lily. And that's going to be our first footnote. In the Christian religion, Gabriel, the archangel, holding in his hand a spray of water lilies, appears to the Virgin Mary in every picture of the Annunciation. This spray, typifying fire and water, or the idea of creation and generation, symbolizes precisely the same idea as the lotus in the hands of the Bodhisattva, who announces to Mahamaya, Gautama's mother, the birth of the world's savior, Buddha. Thus, also, Osiris and Horus were represented by the Egyptians constantly in association with the lotus flower, the two being sun gods or fire. The Holy Ghost being typified by tongues of fire. Now, for me, there is no flower that is going to represent fire, right? Flower is going to represent earth. It is going to represent generation. It is going to represent growth. It is going to represent grounding, but it's not going to represent change. Change to me is going to be fire, plasma, electricity, breath. Those are all fires. The flower is going to represent the earth to me, right? That is through the studies that I have done. It is not for certain that the water lily and the lotus have the same exact meaning, right? That says precisely the same idea. That is not necessarily true. That is a supposition that you are placing upon the interpretation of the symbol. That is why we stopped and started with talking about that. It is entirely possible that it does mean exactly the same thing, but unless it is written, this represents the exact same thing as the lotus, and that is why we are representing it, then no. And who replaced it with the water lily? It had, and still has, its mystic meaning, which is identical with every nation of the earth. We refer the reader to Sir William Jones, footnote 2. See Sir William Jones's dissertations relating to Asia. With the Hindus, the lotus is the emblem of the productive power of nature through the agency of fire and water, spirit and matter. Eternal, says a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, I see Brahm, the Creator, enthroned in thee above the lotus. And Sir W. Jones shows, as noted in the stanzas, that the seeds of the lotus contain, even before they germinate, perfectly formed leaves, the miniature shapes of what one day, as perfected plants, they will become. Now, if you haven't been following along, we were growing lotus, right? We wound up not having somewhere to put them, so they wound up dying, but those lotuses sprouted, and every single seed that sprouted had a stem and no leaf. Every single one of them sprouted with no leaves. They developed leaves from sitting in the sunlight after the stem has come out, and it took a couple of days. So to me, and that may be the specific type of lotus that we were growing, but to me this is not true, right? We may be able to open it up and it has something that resembles a leaf, but I doubt very seriously that it is a fully formed, perfectly formed leaf, because experientially I have seen lotus sprout with stem and no leaf. And not just one, but there were a lot of them, and none of them had a leaf on them. And so to me that is simply untrue, right? Now, again, that could be specific to the variety of lotus that we were growing. That is entirely possible, but it doesn't hold true for the entire genus. So your symbology, while it may be accurate for what you intend it to mean, does not absolutely mean that that is perfectly represented. The lotus in India is the symbol of prolific earth, and what is more, of Mount Meru. See, to me, earth is going to be a much better representative, right? Or it's going to be a much better representative of earth than fire. And for a lot of reasons, but yeah. And what is more, of Mount Meru? The four angels or genii of the four quarters of heaven, the Maharajas, see stanzas, stand each on a lotus. The lotus is the twofold type of the divine and human hermaphrodite, being of dual sex, so to say. I know that there are some plants that reproduce within themselves. Lotus might be one of them, I don't know. But there may be a male and a female, again, I don't know. The other plants do have male and female, some of them don't. I am not an expert on lotus. I've only had the one experience of trying to germinate probably close to 100 seeds. The spirit of fire, or heat, which stirs up, fructifies, and develops into concrete form, everything, from its ideal prototype, which is born of water, or primordial earth, evolved Brahma with the Hindus. And once again, without fire, there is no earth, right? What do you mean, Bid? Fire is the ionic change. It is plasma in active form, but when two molecules bind together, that is through fire. And so carbon can absolutely exist free floating by itself. But when it links with another carbon and becomes a more complicated molecule, that is enabled by fire. Without fire, there is no ionic change. And so in order to create the materiality, there has to be fire first. Fire, to me, is going to be the primary element. From fire, water. From fire, earth. From fire, air. That is due to the ionic process, right? Lightning splits and unifies hydrogen and oxygen, right? It takes the water vapor in the air and separates it into free-flowing molecules. It also condenses them, right? If you are unaware, lightning creates ozone. Ozone is O3 as opposed to O2, which is what we normally breathe, and like carbon monoxide is 1 oxide. And so that change is facilitated by the lightning, by the fire creating the air. It also creates water vapor. All of these things are enabled by the fire of the plasma being activated. So to me, anytime that it says that fire is not the first element, it is wrong. That doesn't mean that I am necessarily correct, but that is the supposition that I'm going for from the logic that I just gave you. Now, these things are floating around, but unless there is a change agent, they don't solidify. They don't coalesce unless there is fire involved. The lotus flower, and I mean the fire is motion, breath, and heat, right? Motion, life, and heat. So when it says God spoke and created, that was fire. The motion is kinetic energy creating friction, which is heat. Heat is plasma, right? Every single instance of heat is going to be the spirit, in reality, activated. So when you see a fire, that is plasma, changing this to that. When you see lightning, it is the same thing happening. When you speak, the same thing happens. You change things around you with the power and the heat of your voice. Your voice is fire. It is a representative of spirit in the manifestation process. The lotus flower, represented as growing out of Vishnu's navel, that god resting on the waters of space and his serpent of infinity, is the most graphic allegory ever made. The universe evolving from the central sun, the point, the ever-concealed germ. Lakshmi, who is the female aspect of Vishnu, footnote. Lakshmi is Venus, Aphrodite, and, like the latter, she sprang from the froth of the ocean with a lotus in her hand. In the Ramayana, she is called Padma. Back to the text. The female aspect of Vishnu, and who is also called Padma, the lotus, is likewise shown floating at creation on a lotus flower, and during the churning of the ocean of space, springing from the sea of milk, like Venus from the froth. Then, seated on a lotus, beauty's bright goddess, peerless three, arose out of the waves, sings an English Orientalist and poet, Sir Monier Williams. The underlying idea in this symbol is very beautiful, and it shows, furthermore, its identical parentage in all the religious systems. Whether in the lotus or water lily shape, it signifies one and the same philosophical idea, namely, the emanation of the objective from the subjective, divine ideation passing from the abstract into the concrete or visible form. For, as soon as darkness, or rather that which is darkness for ignorance, has disappeared in its own realm of eternal light, leaving behind itself only its divine manifested ideation, the creative logoi have their understanding opened, and they see in the ideal world, hitherto concealed in the divine thought, the archetypal forms of all, and proceed to copy and build or fashion upon these models forms, evanescent and transcendent. At this stage of action, the demiurge, footnote, in esoteric philosophy, the demiurge, or logos, regarded as the creator, is simply an abstract term, an idea, like army, as the latter is the all-embracing term for a body of active forces or working units, soldiers. So is the demiurge the qualitative compound of a multitude of creators or builders. Burnoff, the great Orientalist, has seized the idea perfectly when saying that Brahma does not create the earth any more than the rest of the universe. Having evolved himself from the soul of the world, once separated from the first cause, he evaporates with and emanates all nature out of himself. He does not stand above it, but is mixed up with it. Brahma and the universe form one being, each particle of which is, in its essence, Brahma himself, who proceeded out of himself. That's a very complicated way of explaining something. Doesn't necessarily make it the truth, but it is a complicated way of saying something. At this stage of action, the demiurge is not yet the architect. Born out of the twilight of action, he has yet to first perceive the plan, to realize the ideal forms which lie buried in the bosom of eternal ideation, as the future lotus leaves. The immaculate petals are concealed within the seed of the plant. In chapter 20, 30, 40, 51, I think, of the Ritual of Book of the Dead, called Transformation into the Lotus, a head emerging from this flower, the god exclaims, I am the pure lotus, emerging from the luminous one. I carry the messages of Horus. I am the pure lotus, which comes from the solar fields. The lotus idea may be traced even in Elohistic chapter, the first of Genesis, as stated in Isis. It is in this idea that we must look for the origin and explanation of the verse in the Jewish cosmogony, which reads, And God said, Let the earth bring forth the fruit tree, yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself. And what he said was, I am. But in all the primitive religions, the Son of the Father is the creative God, in example. His thought made visible, and before the Christian era, from the Trimurti of the Hindus down to the three Kabbalistic heads of the scriptures, as explained by the Jews, the triune Godhead of each nation was fully defined and substantiated in its allegories. I do not hold that the creative force, the Logos, was a person in any way, shape, or form. It is literally the Spirit of God, once again, all things at one time. We are individualized, we are incarnated, but we don't create the reality in the way that, like we do, shape our reality. We guide our reality, but we don't really create that reality. That's a little bit of a difference in terminology. I understand that. But what you are actually doing when you're manifesting something is bringing the alignment in of the place where that already exists. You are not creating it. You are merely aligning yourself with where it already is. And so the creation is going to be outside of us. That's too much for some people. They have to be intimately involved with some person, and that's fine. You can explain it however you want, but that doesn't, again, make it true. Such is the cosmic and ideal significance of this great symbol in the Eastern peoples. But applied to practical and exoteric worship, which had also its esoteric symbology, the lotus became in time the carrier and container of a more terrestrial idea. No dogmatic religion has ever escaped the sexual element in it, and, to this day, it soils the moral beauty of the root idea. There is nothing immoral about sex. There is nothing that is ruined by a perfectly natural act. If someone is recommending to you that you practice chastity to the exclusion of sexual activity, they are doing you a disservice. I don't care, again, how long it has been written. If they are telling you to abstain from meat, that again is doing you a disservice. If they are telling you to abstain from vegetables, that again is doing you a disservice. If they are telling you that you don't need to have any possessions, that again is doing you a disservice. Life is about balance, and there is no balance in exclusion. That does not mean that there are not things that you should exclude, right? Heroin. There are uses for heroin, but it is not recreational. It is medicinal. There are very valid reasons to use opioid products. Again, it is not recreational. It is medicinal. So you should be excluding things that are of a medicinal nature from using in a recreational manner. But when the time comes that you actually need the medication, the balance is in taking the medication as you need it, not in a recreational manner. That is finding the balance in that. You can find the balance in every single thing in your life. You are not meant to exclude anything. Even anger has its place. That does not mean that you get to let it loose as soon as it strikes you. But it has its place. There are times when being angry is a very valid thing. Anyone who is telling you to exclude is doing you a disservice. They are intentionally leading you in the wrong direction. And if it is not intentional, they do not have an understanding of what they are doing. And to this day, it soils the moral beauty of the root idea. The following is quoted from the same Kabbalistic manuscripts already mentioned. Pointing to like signification was the lotus growing in the waters of the Nile. Its mode of growth peculiarly fitted it as a symbol of the generative activities. The flower of the lotus, which is the bearer of the seed for reproduction, as the result of its maturing, is connected by its placenta-like attachment with Mother Earth, or the womb of Isis, through the water of the womb, that is, the river Nile, by means of the long cord-like stalk, the umbilicus. Nothing can be plainer than the symbol, and to make it perfect in its intended signification, a child is sometimes represented as seated in or issuing from the flower. Footnote. In the Indian Puranas, it is Vishnu, the first, and Brahma, the second logos, or the ideal and practical creators, who are respectively represented, one as manifesting the lotus and the other issuing from it. Thus, Osiris and Isis, the children of Kronos, or time without end, in the development of their nature forces, in this picture become the parents of man under the name Horus. We cannot lay too great stress upon the use of this generative function as a basis for symbolical language and scientific art speech. Thought upon the idea leads at once to reflection upon the subject of creative cause. In its workings, nature is observed to have fashioned a wonderful piece of living mechanism governed by an added living soul. The life, development, and history of which soul, as to its whence, is present, and its whither surpasses all efforts of human intellect. Footnote 2. Not the efforts of the trained psychic faculties of the initiate into Eastern metaphysics and the mysteries of creative nature. It is the profane of the past ages who have degraded the pure ideal of cosmic creation into an emblem of mere human reproduction and sexual functions. It is the esoteric teachings and the initiates of the future, whose mission it is, and will be, to redeem and ennoble once more the primitive conception so sadly profaned by its crude and gross application to exoteric dogmas and personations by theological and ecclesiastical religionists. The silent worship of abstract or noumenal nature, the only divine manifestation, is the one ennobling religion of humanity. The newborn is an ever-recurring miracle, an evidence that, within the workshop of the wound, an intelligent creative power has intervened to fasten a living soul to a physical machine. The amazing wonderfulness of the fact attaches a holy sacredness to all connected with the organs of reproduction, as the dwelling and place of evident constructive intervention of deity. This is a correct rendering of the underlying ideas of old, of the purely pantheistic conceptions, impersonal and reverential, of the archaic philosophers of the prehistoric ages. You assume. Not so, however, when applied to sinful humanity, to the gross ideas attached to personality. Therefore, no pantheistic philosopher would fail to find the remarks that follow the above and which represent the anthropomorphism of Judean symbology, other than dangerous for the sacredness of true religion, and fitting only our materialistic age, which is the direct outcome and result of that anthropomorphic character. For this is the keynote to the entire spirit and essence of the Old Testament. Therefore, goes on the manuscript, treating of the symbolism of art speech of the Bible, the locality of the womb is to be taken as the most holy place, the sanctum sanctorum, and the veritable temple of the living God. It's not just the womb that is the temple of the living God, it is the body, every single piece of it. You are the temple of God, right? Not you. You are the thing piloting the temple, right? Hit the Trinity real quick. You have the body, the flesh, the temple of God that you navigate 5D space with. You have the soul, which is the individualized piece of divinity that makes the decisions for the body in this 5D reality. And you have the spirit, which we have already discussed, but that is the part that changes the now into the next. When you take a breath and the oxygen is absorbed by your lungs and distributed to your circulatory system, that is the spirit enabling that to happen. When you eat food and it changes from food to fuel and powers your body, that is the spirit in action. So, the temple does include the womb, and that is even a special place, right? That is where creation can happen. That is absolutely a special place. But that is not the only temple of God, right? The temple of God is quite literally every single vessel on the planet. And that's not just me and you. That's the animals too. That's the plants as well. They are all different temples of God, expressing in different ways and learning different lessons than we do, absolutely. But they are all just as much of a temple as we are. That doesn't mean that you can't eat them, right? You shouldn't be killing things needlessly, but if you're taking something with the intention to eat it, you are creating and completing the cycle of life and doing exactly what you were called to do. Now, there is a footnote here. Surely the words of the old initiate into the primitive mysteries of Christianity, "Know ye not ye are the temple of God," could not be applied in this sense to men. The meaning may have been and was so, undeniably, in the minds of the Hebrew compilers of the Old Testament. And here is the abyss that lies between the symbolism of the New Testament and the Jewish canon. This gulf would have remained and ever widened had not Christianity, especially and most glaringly the Latin Church, thrown a bridge over it. Modern popery has now spanned it entirely by its dogma of two immaculate conceptions, and the anthropomorphic and at the same time idolatrous character it has conferred upon the mother of its God. With man, the possession of the woman has always been considered as an essential part of himself, to make one out of two, and jealously guarded as sacred. I'm not even going to get into that. Even the part of the ordinary house or home consecrated to the dwelling of the wife was called the penetralia, the secret or sacred, and hence the metaphor of the Holy of Holies of sacred constructions taken from the idea of sacredness by the organs of generation, carried to the extreme of description. Like, there is no generation without male input. How about that? Footnote 2. It was so carried only in the Hebrew Bible and its servile copyist Christian theology. Carried to the extreme of description by metaphor, this part of the house is described in the sacred books as the between the thighs of the house, and sometimes the idea is carried out constructively in great door opening of churches placed inward between flanking buttresses. Those who are looking for something will find it anywhere. You ever notice that when you buy a new car, you suddenly notice that it's everywhere? When you are looking for something, you will find it. If you are convinced that melanin makes a difference in decisions, you will find melanin making a decision or making a difference in decisions everywhere. If you are racist, you will find racism everywhere. If you believe that gender plays a role in things happening, then you will find gender playing a role in things happening, whether it's really there or not. That is what's going on there, right? The temple of God is not exclusively female, and anyone who is telling you that is telling you wrong. They are doing you a disservice. Once again, life is about the balance, and there is a balance of female and feminine and masculine energy in everything. I contain feminine energy, even though I am quite masculine in most of my presentations. My wife contains masculine energy, even though she is feminine in most of her presentations. To distinguish favor for God because of sex is stupid, right? To say that God puts prime significance upon the genitalia that he gave someone is stupid, right? You can be separated because of your thoughts. You can be separated because of your actions, but to be separated because of an immutable characteristic that you did not choose doesn't make any sense. That is saying that it is contrary to God's nature, and that is stupid. No such thought, carried to the extreme, ever existed among the primitive Aryans. This is proven by the fact that in the Vedic period, their women were not placed apart from men in the penetralia, or zananas. Their seclusion began when the Mohammedans, the next heirs to Hebrew symbolism after Christian ecclesiasticism, had conquered the land and gradually enforced their ways and customs upon the Hindus. The pre- and post-Vedic woman was as free as a man, and no impure terrestrial thought was ever mixed with the religious symbology of the early Aryans. That is true for many, many, many belief systems. There are still today matriarchal belief systems. The idea and application are purely Semitic. This is corroborated by the writer of the said intensely learned and Kabbalistic revelation itself when he closes the above quoted passages by adding, "If to these organs as symbols of creative cosmic agencies, the idea of the origin of measures as well as of time periods can be attached, then, indeed, in the constructions of the temples as dwellings of deity, or of Jehovah, that part designated as the Holy of Holies, or Most Holy Place, should borrow its title from the recognized sacredness of the generative organs, considered as symbols of measures as well as of creative cause. With the ancient wise, there was no name and no idea and no symbol of a first cause." Most decidedly not. Rather, never give a thought to it and leave it forever nameless, as the early pantheist did, than degrade the sacredness of that ideal of ideals by dragging down its symbols into such anthropomorphic forms. Here again one perceives the immense chasm between Aryan and Semitic religious thought. Two opposite poles, sincerity and concealment. With the Brahmins, who have never invested with an original sin element the natural procreative functions of mankind, it is a religious duty to have a son. A Brahmin, in days of old, having accomplished his mission of human creator, retired to the jungle and passed the rest of his days in religious meditations. He had accomplished his duty to nature as mortal man and his co-worker, and henceforth gave all of his thought to spiritual immortal portion in himself, regarding the terrestrial as a mere illusion, an evanescent dream, which it is. That is horribly selfish. That is horribly selfish. That is horribly selfish. You have done your duty. You have impregnated someone. So you're just going to withdraw from society and no longer produce anything beneficial? You're no longer going to farm. You're no longer going to harvest. You're no longer going to sell things or whatever it is that you make your living by. You're just going to go off into the woods and meditate. That is horribly selfish. Horribly so. And I say the same thing about Nietzsche. With the Semite, it was different. He invented a temptation of flesh in a Garden of Eden, showed his God, esoterically, the tempter and the ruler of nature, cursing forever, an act which was in the logical program of that nature. That is definitely a thing, right? In order to take Genesis at face value, you have to assume that God, upon creating humans, did not know that they were going to eat the fruit. Right? First off, why is this fruit that they can't eat there? So they can learn a lesson? Okay, you built into them that they would indeed do this thing. That is an enormous problem with original sin, right? We talk about that a lot in the Unconventional Bible Study, how some of these things are incongruous. When Moses was leading the Israelites out of Egypt, they completely flummoxed God. He had no idea whatsoever that they would be rebellious. He had no clue whatsoever that they would not just do exactly what he said. He had no clue. God was unknowing of the nature of man. Seems legit, doesn't it? Footnote on nature. The same idea is carried out exoterically in the incidents of Egypt. The Lord God tempts sorely Pharaoh and plagues him with great plagues, lest the king should escape punishment, and thus afford no pretext for one more triumph to his chosen people. And again, I covered that too. The Unconventional Bible Study, 161 videos about why I no longer particularly follow that book. All this, exoterically, as in the cloak and the dead letter of Genesis and the rest, and at the same time, esoterically, he regarded the supposed sin and fall as an act so sacred as to choose the organ, the perpetrator of the original sin, as the fittest and most sacred symbol to represent that God who is shown as branding its entering into function as disobedience and everlasting sin. But if they can convince you of original sin, they can keep you controlled, which is, after all, the entire point of the religious system. I say all of the time that these control systems were created by people creating a religion. It can be divinely inspired, whatever. You still got things wrong, like enormously wrong. And so they created a system to pull their people out of the surrounding peoples, and so control the actions of the people. A control system. The control system can be correct, but it is still a system of control. And no matter who you are or what you believe, there is still a system of control guiding your life. It may not be a correct one, it may be a completely misguided one, but it's there. Much like government, nothing exists outside of a government. I know the anarchists are going to go wild with that, but it is true. From the time where there were more than two people together, there have been rules by which they interacted with each other. Those rules lead to government. Someone is going to lead, even if it is not an elected position, or even if it is not a hereditary position. If you are on a hunting party, somebody is leading that hunting party. If you are gathering, somebody is leading that gathering. Somebody is in charge of preparing. Somebody is in charge of preserving. Somebody is in charge. Right? And that is a natural function of community. Somebody will take charge. It is the same for the control system, right? If you are in the control system, then somebody is in charge and they are helping you, hopefully, to overcome something that is limiting you. When we did Exodus and we talked about the laws, which were, by the way, not given by God, right? You can make the argument that the Ten Commandments were, but the law most definitely was not. That was a fabrication by Moses upon direction from Jethro, who later Moses kills, or has killed. And so That whole situation was to separate from the surrounding peoples the chosen people. Now, I don't believe in a chosen people. I believe that a person can be chosen. If there was chosen in the situation, it was Moses, not everybody else. And that doesn't mean that you cannot align yourself in a way that would make you chosen, but you are not just naturally born into a chosen people. It just doesn't happen that way. But this control system was to isolate them from other people. If you read through the law, some of them make a lot of sense, and then some of them don't, right? The don't kill other people, that's a really good one, but it's okay to kill people if they pick up sticks on the wrong day. That you can beat them in the head with rocks, leave them out for the wild animals to get because they are blasphemers. They went on the wrong day. It doesn't matter that they were cold or they needed to cook some food. They didn't have any firewood. They went on the wrong day. You have to kill them. It's just an immutable rule. Or it's not okay for a man to sleep with a man, but we are not going to outlaw a woman sleeping with a woman. I know we have this system where one man has more than one wife, and maybe they want to entertain that possibility. But it's okay to specifically outlaw this man shall not sleep with another man. We just won't deal with the other one. Even though there are definitely rules for women just as much as there are men. So it makes sense why it happened in the way that it did, if you think about it. But if you don't think about it, you think that he's talking about everyone. He's not talking about everyone. He is not talking about homosexuality in general. He is talking about specifically man and man. That is for a reason. Some things they get right, some things they don't. And so you should investigate anything that you believe in and ensure that it is actually saying what you believe that it does and that it is worthy of listening to. Back to the text. All this, exoterically, as in the cloak and dead letter of Genesis and the rest, and at the same time esoterically, he regarded the supposed sin and fall as an act so sacred as to choose the organ. Okay, we did this whole paragraph. Next. Who can ever fathom the paradoxical depths of the Semitic mind? And this paradoxical element, minus the innermost significance, has now passed entirely into Christian theology and dogma. Again, the Bible study will clue you in on a lot of things. Whether the early fathers of the church knew the esoteric meaning of the Hebrew Old Testament, or whether only a few of them were aware of it, while the others remained ignorant of the secret, is for posterity to decide. One thing is certain at any rate. As the esotericism of the New Testament agrees perfectly with that of the Hebrew Mosaic books, it does not. And since, at the same time, a number of purely Egyptian symbols and pagan dogmas in general, the Trinity, for example, have been copied by and incorporated into the Synoptics and St. John, it becomes evident that the identity of those symbols was known to the writers of the New Testament, whoever they were. They must have been aware, also, of the priority of the Egyptian esotericism, since they have adopted several such symbols that typify purely Egyptian conceptions and beliefs, in their outward and inward meaning, and which are not to be found in the Jewish canon. One of such is the water lily in the hands of the archangel, in the early representations of his appearance to the Virgin Mary. And these symbolical images are preserved to this day in the iconography of the Greek and Roman churches. Thus, water, fire, the cross, as well as the dove, the lamb, and other sacred animals, with all their combinations, yield, esoterically, an identical meaning, and must have been accepted as an improvement upon Judaism, pure and simple. For the lotus and water are among the oldest symbols, and in their origin are purely Aryan, though they became property during the branching off of the fifth race. Let us give an example. Letters, as much as numbers, were all mystic, whether in combination or each taken separately. The most sacred of all is the letter M. It is both masculine and feminine, or androgyne, and is made to symbolize water, the great deep, in its origin. It is mystic in all the languages, Eastern and Western, and stands as a glyph for the waves. Thus, in the Aryan esotericism, as in the Semitic, this letter has always stood for the waters. E.g., in Sanskrit, Makara, the 10th sign of the zodiac, means a crocodile, or rather an aquatic monster, associated always with water. The letter Ma is equivalent to and corresponds with number 5, composed of a binary, the symbol of the two sexes separated, of the ternary, symbol of the third life, the progeny of the binary. This, again, is often symbolized by a pentagon, the latter being a sacred sign, the divine monogram. Maitreya is the secret name of the 5th Buddha, and the Kalki avatar of the Brahmins. How is it a fifth name, a secret name, if it is recorded? The last Messiah who will come at the culmination of the great cycle. It is also the initial letter of the Greek metzis, or divine wisdom, of Memra, the word or logos, and of Mithras, the Mehir, the monad mystery. All these are born in and from the great deep, and are the sons of Maya, the mother, in Egypt, Mouth, in Greece, Minerva, divine wisdom, Mary or Miriam, Mira, etc., of the mother of the Christian logos, and of Maya, the mother of Buddha. Madhava and Madhavi are the titles of the most important gods and goddesses of the Hindu pantheon. And finally, Mandala is in Sanskrit a circle or an orb, the 10 divisions of the Rig Veda. The most sacred, are we going to get a definition of the 10s in the Rig Veda? Like, the Rig Veda is the next planned, and so I would be very happy to get the 10 for a reason. The most sacred names in India begin with this letter generally, from Mahat, the first manifested intellect, and Mandara, the great mountain used by the gods to churn the ocean, down to Mandaikan, the heavenly Ganga, Ganges, Manu, etc., etc. It is important to note that it could merely be the sound, right? It is really simple to say It doesn't even require any movement. That is literally just humming. And that can entirely be why these all start with M. It does not necessarily mean that it is water. It can be, but it doesn't necessarily mean. Shall this be called a coincidence? A strange one it is then, indeed, when we find even Moses, found in the water of the Nile, having the symbolical consonant in his name. And Pharaoh's daughter called his name Moses because, she said, I drew him out of water. Footnote. Even to the 7 daughters of the Midian priest, who, coming to draw the water, had Moses water their flock, for which service the Midian gave to Moses Zipporah as wife. All this has the same secret meaning. Not necessarily. Like, Midian was an actual location, right? One which you should definitely study if you were going to follow that particular religion. Besides which, the Hebrew sacred name of God applied to this letter, M, is Meburak, the holy or blessed, and the name of the water of the flood is Mabul, a reminder of the 3 Marys at the crucifixion and their connection with Mar, the sea or water, may close this example. That seems to me to be you trying to read that into something. This is why, in Judaism and Christianity, the Messiah is always connected with water, baptism, the fishes, the sign of zodiac called Meenam in Sanskrit, and even with the Matsaya, fish avatar, and the lotus, the symbol of the womb, or the water lily, which is the same. In the relics of ancient Egypt, the greater the antiquity of the votive symbols and emblems of the objects exhumed, the oftener are the lotus flowers and the water found in connection with the solar gods. The god Khnum, the moist power, water, as Thales taught, being the principle of all things, sits on a throne enshrined in a lotus, Saitic epoch Serapeum. The god Bes stands on the lotus, ready to devour his progeny. Teoti, the god of mystery and wisdom, the sacred scribe of Amenti, wearing the solar disk as headgear, sits with a bull's head, the sacred bull of Mendes being a form of Teoti, and a human body on a full-blown lotus. Finally, it is the goddess Heket, under her shape of a frog, who rests on the lotus, thus showing her connection with water. And it is this frog symbol, undeniably the most ancient of their Egyptian deities, from whose unpoetical shape the Egyptologists have been vainly trying to unravel her mystery and functions. Its adoption in the church by the early Christians showed that they knew it better than our modern Orientalists. The frog or toad goddess was one of the chief cosmic deities connected with creation on account of her amphibious nature, and chiefly because of her apparent resurrection after long ages of solitary life enshrined in old walls, in rocks, etc. She not only participated in the organization of the world, together with Khnum, but was also connected with the dogma of resurrection. Footnote. With the Egyptians, it was the resurrection in rebirth after 3,000 years of purification, either in Devachan or the field of bliss. There must have been some very profound and sacred meaning attached to this symbol, since, notwithstanding the risk of being charged with a disgusting form of zoolatry, the early Egyptian Christians adopted it into their churches. A frog or toad enshrined in a lotus flower, or simply without the latter emblem, was the form chosen for the church lamps, on which were engraved the words, "I am the resurrection." Footnote. Such frog goddesses may be seen at Bulak in the Cairo Museum. For the statement about the church lamps and inscriptions, it is the learned ex-director of the Bulak Museum, Mr. Gaston Maspero, who must be held responsible. These frog goddesses are also found on all the mummies. And that is going to bring us to the end of the study of the lotus as a symbol. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. There are very good reasons to separate symbology from what we know and what we assume. You may be right in your assumptions, but unless you have verifiable proof that this was the intention behind the symbol, you are assuming that. Right? It may be that in the Rig Vedas it is plainly laid out. We will get to that and we will see. But to assume that because it was in the Rig Vedas in this particular way, which I don't even know that it was, but just assume that it is, right? Just because it is there does not mean that people who elsewhere used the same symbol were aware of the Rig Vedas, or that they were even using this symbol in the same manner that other people do. You can put your assumptions into things, but you should, if you are assuming, right, if you don't have verifiable proof that this was a thought, and for most of the symbology we do not, right, currently, modern day symbology we do, right, we know why they built Washington, D.C. in the particular pattern that they did. We know why the statues that they used have the symbology that they do. It is recorded that this is the meaning that we intended. That is not true for other things, right? They use the symbology. They may have even taught it, but they didn't write it down. And because they didn't write it down, we don't know that. We assume that because we use this for this symbol, that everybody else did too. And it could be something completely different, right? It could be a symbol, like the eagle can be a symbol of air to other people. But here in the United States, the eagle is a symbol of freedom. These are differences that are not necessarily contradictory, but are not necessarily the same. When we are dealing with symbology from antiquity, we just need to bear that in mind, right? Even hieroglyphs, until we got to the point where we had the Rosetta Stone and we were able to translate from a language we already knew, and from there be able to translate the other ones that are on the tablet. Until we had that, we were guessing about the symbology of hieroglyphs. Now that we have that, we can, with more accuracy, translate those hieroglyphs into modern language. Even that doesn't mean that it was the original intention. Whenever the Rosetta Stone was formed, hieroglyphs were already ancient, and they could have evolved over time. And just because they meant that here does not mean that they meant that there. These are important things to keep in mind when dealing with any of the symbology. You can invest whatever you want into the symbology and thereby pass on knowledge. But if you don't record what you mean for that to mean, it does no good. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that I have talked about, drop it in the comments, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.